Well, it's a privilege as well as a pleasure to be here this evening, and to see so many people here. I knew the Donegal Abbey Singers were good, but I didn't realize they had such a following. I'm very grateful to Joe for the invitation to open this year's McGill. I'm a big fan of Donegal, and I come here as often as I can. But I'm also a keen enthusiast for this kind of open political, business and civic forum. We don't have a tradition of this kind of summer school in Britain. You should cherish it. It's extremely valuable. The theme for this year's debate is Transforming Ireland, the first 100 days, the next 5 years. I think it points to the great sense of change and challenge that's palpable at the moment, across Ireland, indeed across Europe. And I just want to take a few minutes at the start to reflect, as it were, from my perspective on some of those changes and some of those challenges. It's been a historic year for relations between Ireland and Britain. The successful visit in May by Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth symbolised the remarkable transformation in our relations. It was the culmination of years of work by many people across the Irish and British governments and beyond, because that kind of deep transformation doesn't happen quickly. It takes hard work and concerted effort. As Joe said, the last British ambassador to speak here was Nicholas Fenn in the 80s, when things were very different. Nicholas wrote in one of his dispatches on British-Irish relations that we end the year as we began it, glaring at each other across the Irish Sea. Well, we've come a very long way from those dark and difficult days. But in fact, you don't have to go as far back to get a sense of that change. When I arrived in 2009, I spent my first months working hard with colleagues in London and Dublin to push for the completion of devolution of policing and justice in Northern Ireland. It's easy to forget now that this was far from a done deal. The last piece of the Good Friday Belfast Agreement, left until last precisely because of its difficulty, only fitted into place in early 2010 after a massive effort by the Northern Ireland parties, encouraged by the two governments working together from prime ministerial level down. And that was 18 months ago. Since then, we've seen the Northern Ireland Executive more than step up to the mark, confident in the full range of their responsibilities, and more recently, successful Assembly elections marking a huge step forward for political stability in the North. We also saw elections and a new government in Westminster, confounding those who thought British political culture might have difficulty stretching to an effective coalition. And we saw very quickly, in David Cameron's handling of the Savile inquiry into Bloody Sunday, and again in George Osborne's advocacy of bilateral loan support to Ireland, that the new generation of political leaders in London attached the highest priority to relations between Britain and Ireland. They take the Good Friday Agreement legacy very seriously, but they also see the relationship as a dynamic one, looking forward to and building for the future. And that's what we sought to capture in the Queen's visit in May, and the parallel visits by the Prime Minister, the Foreign Secretary and others. The Queen's visit spoke, as she said herself, to the complexity of our history, its many layers and traditions, and to the importance of forbearance and conciliation, to being able to bow to the past but not be bound by it. But the Queen also said, and her visit showed, that together we have much to celebrate. The ties between our people, the shared values, the economic, business and cultural links that make us so much more than neighbours, that make us firm friends and equal partners. As she said, the world moves on quickly. The challenges of the past have been replaced by new economic challenges, which will demand the same imagination and courage. And the lessons from the peace process are clear. Whatever life throws at us, our individual response will be all the stronger for working together and sharing the load. And it's certainly the case that the ties that link Ireland and Britain are significant, and so are the challenges we both face. We're linked by our people, a golden thread of family, friendship and affection, as the Queen said. 6 million people in Britain who have an Irish grandparent, 100,000 British-born people living in Ireland, 6 million people going backwards and forth between the two countries each year. Britain accounts for half of all those visiting Ireland, Ireland 10% of all those visiting Britain, with some 200 flights a day. We're linked by our cultures, from Swift, Sheridan and Wilde to John Banville and Anne Enright, 2 of the last 6 Man Booker winners. British and Irish performers, broadcasters, singers, actors, sports stars are as familiar in one country as the other. Ryan Tubridy spreads good cheer on Radio 2, while victories by Graham McDowell, Rory McIlroy and Darren Clarke are cheered across these islands. We're also linked by our economies. Our bilateral trade is enormous, worth almost €1 billion a week, and it grew again last year. Ireland is the UK's 5th largest market, worth some 2% of GDP. The UK is Ireland's largest trading partner. Our banks. Irish banks hold some £25 billion of deposits in the UK, including the Post Office Savings Bank. UK banks have some £125 billion of exposure in Ireland, including Ulster Bank. Ireland accounts for some €38 billion of investment in the UK. The UK accounts for about 1/3 of all the direct investment flows into Ireland. And there are over 40,000 Irish directors of UK companies. Those kind of links matter. But we're also linked by the challenges we face. The two governments, as the Taoiseach knows well, in London and Dublin, inherited sizable fiscal deficits which needed to be got under control, and which are still projected to be over 10% this year. Banking sectors under strain and in need of reform, demands for public service which had to be met from shrinking government budgets, and a pressing need to find ways to build growth and create jobs. We may be separated by a currency, but we're united by our shared economic challenges. As Nick Clegg said in Paris earlier this month, mistakes have been made by countries outside the Eurozone as well as those inside it, and as members of the EU, all of our economic fortunes are tied together. The UK exports more to our Eurozone partners than we do to the US, and vice versa. We're clear, a successful Eurozone is essential for a prosperous UK. Countries like the UK should not see ourselves as spectators watching from the wings. But if Europe's economic woes are a Eurozone problem, they're a problem for all of us. We can all agree that the Eurozone needs a success story. And by any objective assessment, Ireland has the potential to be that success story. But it will be tough. The European Commissioner for Economic and Monetary Affairs, Olli Rehn, reflecting on Finland's experience in the 90s, wrote the other day, "In Finland, the bus led to a very painful process of adjustment involving unpopular bank supports, major expenditure cuts and tax increases, while prioritising research and innovation expenditure and other growth-enhancing measures. The efforts paid off. The result was a strong export-led recovery period, at the end of which Finland was considered to be among the most competitive economies in the world." Ireland can do it. And the package of measures agreed by Eurozone leaders in Brussels last week will help. The proposed flexibility, including lower interest rates, long maturities, the possibility of precautionary actions, it's all very significant, as the markets have recognised. The agreement should help stabilise the situation across the Eurozone and help Ireland specifically. Britain, as George Osborne has indicated, will work with Ireland to adjust our bilateral loan support as well. We all have a shared interest to reinforce a sustainable path for Ireland. Fortunately, as I'll point out to anybody who will listen, the underlying economic situation here is strong. The economy is growing for the first time in 4 years. Indeed, in cash terms, it could grow 3% this year, largely driven by exports. I have to tell you, looking on from Britain, we're very jealous of your trade surplus. Ireland's exports grew by more than 6% last year, to the extent that the value of your exports is greater than your GDP, which is remarkable. It reflects an enormous amount of economic activity for a population of 4.5 million, but it also reflects significant gains in Ireland's competitiveness, with labour costs down 6% in the last 2 years. And companies are voting with their feet. The number of first-time investors in Ireland is up 20%. The number of inquiries and expressions of interest that we're seeing from the UK is up significantly as well. Across key sectors, sectors with real potential for future growth, like agri-food, pharma, medical, ICT, Ireland has established itself as a key international hub. Ireland produces all of the Botox in the world. All of the Viagra outside of the Americas. And top 10 global beverages. Certainly grounds for optimism. Ireland's an extraordinary country with extraordinary positives. But in some respects, Ireland might benefit from looking a little more like some other European countries. The package of measures agreed by the Eurozone last week doesn't mean that the choices facing Ireland are any less tough. Having less to pay doesn't mean that Ireland gets more money. The basic task for Ireland as for others, including Britain, remains the same: to tackle the deficit, get budgets under control, and build recovery. But, and I hope that you won't lose sight of this over the next days as you reflect on the challenges of the next 5 years, Ireland has friends, starting with Britain. It's how we respond to challenges that defines us. Britain and Ireland stand together as equals, as partners, and as friends. And together, working with others, we can meet these challenges. Thank you very much.